All right, well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today. I see we have a lot of rulemaking advisory committee members here and a lot of members of the public interested parties. So thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate your participation. So this is the first rulemaking advisory committee meeting for Division 82, which covers rules for waterway leases, licenses, and registrations. My name is Sylvia Chubrowski, and I'm a facilitator with Mosaic Resolutions, and I'll be helping to facilitate these meetings and the process alongside Department of State Land staff. You probably saw that this meeting is being recorded. And today's meeting is really just a first intro meeting so that you can get the background and information that you need to participate in this rulemaking. So you'll hear a lot about waterway leases and licenses and registrations today, and just a little bit about how rulemaking works. And this is really an opportunity for you to ask all the questions that you have so that you have kind of the knowledge that you need as we move forward to get your input. So future rulemaking advisory committee meetings are where we'll really seek your input on the rules and the proposed updates to the rules. And today's just a lot of background information for you. And just to note, today's meeting, this is a rulemaking advisory committee meeting. So we primarily are here to hear from rulemaking advisory committee members. And I see there are a lot of interested parties on the line too. I'll go over the agenda in a little bit, but we will have time for interested party comments towards the end of today's agenda. And we ask that you just stay in listening mode while the RAC has their conversation for the beginning pieces of today's agenda. So maybe let's take out the slides for just a second. I just want to do maybe quick intros here. And I'll turn first to the DSL team, and then I'll have RAC members introduce themselves. So I'll go to Blake, Justin Russell, and then Danielle.
Howdy, folks. My name is Blake Helm. I am the proprietary specialist for the Department of State Lands. I handle planning and policy for our proprietary program, which authorizes waterway use authorizations over Oregon-owned waterways.
My name is Justin Russell. I'm a proprietary coordinator at the Department of State Lands as well. And I'm kind of a staff level person who is more regularly involved with kind of the implementation of the rules that we're going to be discussing here.
Thank you. I'm Danielle Boudreau. I am the department's rulemaking coordinator, and my major role is as project manager for this. I will be helping out during meetings, providing technical support, being a scribe, just kind of doing the grunt work in these meetings. But if you have questions about the rulemaking process, I am the person that you'll want to contact. Thank you.
Indispensable grunt work. It's more than just that, Danielle. All right, well, thank you. I'll go to RAC members to say hello if you just want to, say your name, organization, and anything you want to say about, why you're here for the rulemaking, or just anything you want to say by way of introduction. I'll go first to Alan Hansen and then Dylan Paul.
Hi, I'm Alan Hansen. I'm the Policy and Environmental Manager for the Oregon State Marine Board.
Hi, everyone. Dylan Paul. I do real estate services for the city of Portland and manage most of my teams manage most of the DSL license that we have, but also very involved with lots of community partners throughout the city.
Great, thank you. And then Garrett Phillips and then Justin.
Hi, I'm Garrett Phillips from Columbia River Estuary Study Task Force. I'm a planner, and we do planning work for local governments and ports, and we also do our own restoration projects throughout the Columbia River Estuary.
Hey, good morning. My name is Justin Teutsch. I'm with Columbia Crossings. We are a marina operator on Hayden Island, and I'm also, if it's okay, my colleague Elizabeth Bowden will also occasionally join to make sure that we have good coverage. And we are leasee with DSL on several submerged land leases interact regularly on the permitting side, and want to be involved in the process in that context, and hopefully contribute a bit from and offer some of our perspectives on the lease process and the changes as they are considered.
Great, thanks, Justin. Yeah, and great for all RAC members to have alternates if you are able to. So Elizabeth, do you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth.
Turn on your camera. Well, all right. I told her not to. I was like, be discreet.
Okay. Hello, I'm Elizabeth. I work with Justin at Columbia Crossings.
Thank you. All right, let's go to Jim, Ryan, and then Laurel.
My name is Jim Ryan. I am a floating homeowner at Jansen Beach Moorage on Hayden Island. Moorage that's been in operation for probably half a century. We have had a continuing lease with DSL for at least since '97 when the owners purchased the moorage. I also am representing the Waterfront Organizations of Oregon, which is has an interesting acronym called WOO. And anyway, I'm very interested in the process. What's the history, really? I'm interested a little bit in the history of what rulemaking has been like before this event. And I also have questions about the study that was released in just over 6 years ago that sort of underpins the suggestions that are being made by the Department of State Lands. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Laurel Hillman. I work for Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. Most of the time, my job is involving the Ocean Shore State Recreation Area managed by the agency, but I also have been involved in the State Scenic Waterway program over the years.
Welcome, Laurel. And then let's go to Lindsay and then Mike Dunning.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Hutchison. I'm the staff attorney at Willamette Riverkeeper. We're a small nonprofit that works throughout the basin, and we do many things, including restoration and encouraging public recreation on our rivers.
Good morning, Mike Dunning, Chief Operations Officer, Port Coos Bay. I am representing Oregon Public Ports Association.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Lindsay and Mike. Are there any rulemaking advisory committee members that I missed? All right. There are a few seats that the department is still looking to fill, so we may add some as we move forward, but welcome everyone today. Thanks for saying hello. Okay, and I'll say today's meeting is going to feel like a lot of talking at you because it's the background, it's the information so that you all kind of are on the same page about what we're doing here. Future meetings will have a lot more discussion. So just know that if today's meeting feels like a lot of you don't get to talk, that's, you know, future meetings won't feel like that. We do hope to have a lot of robust discussion. That being said, as DSL is doing their presentations, if you have questions, anything that you want to ask, please feel free. This is your opportunity to get the information that you need. All right, so let's go back to the agenda. All right, I'll go over our agenda for today. So today we did our introductions and we're going to spend a lot of time up front just on what is this process, what is rulemaking, and what is your role in the process. So we'll spend some time there. And then really the most of today's meeting is going to just be on background and rulemaking purpose and scope. So mostly Blake Helm here will be kind of providing a little bit about the program and what this rulemaking is seeking to change. And then we'll have some time for interested parties to make comments, and I'll go over those instructions for making comments later on. But I know we have a lot of folks here from the public today, so we'll ask for folks to keep their comments to about 2 minutes apiece, and try to get as many folks to be able to make their comment as we can today. And then we'll just end with next steps and adjourn the meeting. And also you should have received an email from me with the meeting materials and the agenda and the packet. If you did not, please let me know. You can just let me know in chat if for some reason the email didn't come through, but that also included the meeting packet, which is online. And I think Danielle will include a link in the chat to the online materials, but kind of minimal materials for today. We had the agenda. We had the operating principles for the rulemaking advisory committee, which we'll go over today in detail. And then also you should have received a 4-pager on proposed rule changes for Division 82, which is a really helpful document that kind of outlines the key things that will be covered in this rulemaking. So be on the lookout for that. Hope you're able to review those in advance or after this meeting. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so just some Zoom protocols. I think we all know how to work in this virtual environment by now, but when we get to our discussion or Q&A portions for the meetings, we'll just ask you to raise your hand to get in the queue to speak. So if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you either have a raise hand button or you have a reactions button. Click on that and get to raise hand. And I know we have at least one person by phone. So if you're on the phone, you can press *9 to get in the queue to speak. And I'll try to, in future meetings, especially seek a balance of speaking time during our discussions. And we ask that you keep your mic muted unless you're speaking to reduce background noise, and use your video when you can, especially when you're making your comments. I know sometimes we want to be off video for part of the meeting, but especially when you're speaking, it's helpful to make it feel like we're in a room together, and just be respectful of each other. All right, next slide. Okay, so here I think I'm turning it over to Danielle to say a little bit about rulemaking, and then I'll go into kind of the principles for how this committee will work together. Over to you, Danielle.
Okay, thank you. So do we have anybody, I know we have a couple of state employees who've probably been involved in RACs before, but anybody else on the RAC who's, just feel free to raise your hand if you've been involved in a RAC before. Okay, Lindsay, thank you. Just give us an idea of, how much information you need, and feel free to ask questions about the rulemaking process. I can answer pretty much all of them, and that's part of why I'm here. So today, the RAC, the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, is, you'll hear us refer to you as the RAC, is being convened to review and provide input on proposed lease rates and calculation methods, proposed changes to application fees, proposed rule language, and potential fiscal impacts. So I'll start with giving a brief overview of what administrative rules are. So administrative rules are those things that implement statute. So you have statute, administrative rule, and then policies. And really that's the intent of rules, is to implement statute and to kind of provide guidelines for how things work. So this is just a pretty basic cycle of the rulemaking process. And we begin with drafting proposed rule language. And to start this, we have approval to begin the process being provided by the DSL director of the State Land Board. And in this case, it's the State Land Board that oversees the approval for these rules. And then next, once we have our draft rule language finished, we'll convene a rulemaking advisory committee. And these meetings are open to the public. Rule language and materials are reviewed by the advisory committee, which includes partners and those impacted by the rules. So we try to get a broad spectrum of anybody who could be affected by the changes in these rules. Next, once we finish with our rulemaking advisory committee, we'll move into a public comment period. And this begins with our notice of proposed rulemaking, which is published by the Secretary of State. And then we'll have a public rule hearing about halfway through the comment period. And DSL's public comment periods last a minimum of 30 days. I believe with this rulemaking, we're planning on having it a little bit longer because it affects quite a large number of people in this state. And we'll probably have more than one public rule hearing. But the RAC will be notified of the public comment period and the public rule hearing. And also notice will be sent out to our rulemaking list. So those of you who are here because you did receive notice that we're having this RAC meeting, you should also be getting a notice of the public comment period later on. And that's going to be about 7 months down the line. And then the next step is to adopt the rules. And the amendments are made as needed in response to public comments. So we do take into account what the public says and make adjustments as needed based on that. And then we get approval to file with the Secretary of State, which in this case is by the State Land Board. So all of our proposed rules and fees and everything that y'all talk about, including any public comment, that's all provided to the State Land Board for their review and then later approval. Are there any questions about the rulemaking process? Yes, Jim. You're muted.
So once amendments in the fourth quadrant, amendments are made as needed. If there are amendments to be made, are these released again for public comment or
no? We only have one public comment period, but in this case, since it does go before the State Land Board, there is time for the public to provide testimony to the State Land Board at that meeting. And so we'll provide notice, again, similar to how we do notice for the public comment period. We'll inform that same listserv and group of folks that when these rules are going to the State Land Board.
Okay.
Thanks for the question, Jim. Anyone else? All right. Okay. If we go to the next slide, I'm just going to go over a bit in the next few slides here on the operating principles for the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, which is really, kind of the agreement for how you all will operate in this RAC and conduct yourselves in meetings, etc. So you should have received that in your meeting packet earlier last week. And I'll just go over your role, the role of myself as the facilitator and of staff in these meetings. Your meeting schedule, kind of agreements for dialogue and protocols for the public and communications outside of the meetings. So you as RAC members are advisory to the Department of State Lands here. So you're an advisory board, you kind of provide advice and frame policy choices for DSL. And we do encourage you to attend and participate in all meetings. It's really important to get to each meeting. Each meeting provides a unique opportunity to provide your input on different pieces of the rules. So we really do encourage you to attend all meetings. If you can't attend meetings, then please do provide an alternate or let us know in advance as well. And I'll cover that a little bit more. And throughout the meetings, there's just going to be a lot of topics and options presented to you. And so when we go through those, we'll just ask you to kind of address them, talk about the pros and cons, and seek to develop recommendations to the best that you can as a rulemaking advisory committee. Next slide. Before each meeting, we'll strive to send out background materials about a week in advance, and we do encourage you to look at those, read them so that you understand the issues that we're going to be talking about at the RAC meetings. And then when we're in our meetings together, we know that you all come from a lot of diverse backgrounds, diverse perspectives. So this is a place where you're going to be asked to work collaboratively to explore issues, develop recommendations, sit in each other's shoes, listen to different perspectives, and kind of get to some outcomes that really meet the best needs of everyone in the room. Next slide. All right, so you all have been selected here as RAC members and really appreciate your participation. I know this is a big commitment to attend all of these meetings and read the materials in advance, kind of think through everything. But it's an important part of what you've signed on to do and really appreciate that. And like I said before, you all are coming from a diversity of perspectives, and that was intentionally created by DSL so that the department could create rules that really meet the needs of lots of different interests here. If going forward, if you're not able to attend meetings, please do let me know before the meeting, just so that we know who to expect. And if you have an alternate, we would appreciate you being able to have that alternate join the meeting so that they can be there in your place. Next slide. Okay, your schedule of meetings. So we have 6 meetings on the calendar, and today's our first meeting, really just kind of the overview. And in December, we have a meeting to talk about lease rates, application fees, and financial assurance requirements. And today, Blake will talk a little bit more about what all of that means. And then in January, we have a meeting to talk about general provisions and lease conditions and the application review process. In February, we have a meeting on abandoned and derelict vessels and kind of some of the minimal changes, grammar changes to the rules. And then in March, the topic there will be communication plan, fees and formula sheet, the updated application form and authorization forms. And then in April, you will review materials for the notice of proposed rulemaking. So that is a fiscal impact statement and racial equity impact statement. And you'll hear a little bit more about that today. So 6 meetings on the calendar. These are all Wednesdays at 9 a.m. And I'll make this call later on today too, but we encourage you to kind of look at this schedule. And if you see that there are meeting dates that you know you can't make, let me know now. There's still a chance that maybe we could reschedule some of these too if a lot of folks aren't able to make them. So just let me know. You know, we'd rather reschedule for a time that works for everyone rather than have a lot of people not be able to make the RAC meetings. All right, next slide. Okay, and I will be your primary contact throughout this rulemaking as your facilitator. So my information's here, and I sent you an email before, so hopefully you got that. And for the DSL staff, primary contacts will be Danielle as the rules coordinator and Blake Helm as the proprietary specialist.
I apologize to Justin. I left you off by accident. I will add you on there before I publish this presentation to the web. So apologies to Justin Russell.
Perfect, thanks. All right, next slide. Okay, so me as your facilitator, my role here is really to just help ensure a good environment for you all to participate. I have no stake in the outcome of what happens here. I'm here to help you all have a conversation, make sure that everybody is contributing and nobody is overly contributing. I'll also help kind of make sure that all of the input that you provide is summarized and that those summarized kind of get moved forward. And we'll ask you if everything is captured correctly in those summaries after meetings. And I'll also provide the coordination between meetings. So if you have any questions or want to talk one-on-one or just, you know, are confused about anything, reach out to me and I'll help you get to the person you need to talk to or help answer those questions. And again, I'm not here with any stake in the outcome, so I won't make any recommendations. I'm really here to just help hear what you are saying and maybe help you all kind of coalesce around your recommendations moving forward. Next slide. All right, and the Department of State Lands here, they will be providing all the technical information, administrative information for the RAC meetings and are in charge of kind of the scheduling, administrative preparation of meeting materials and making sure that everything is on the public record and everything's on the website. So members of the public too, if you feel like anything's missing from the website, please let DSL know. Want to make sure everything's in the public record there. Okay. So members, we have some operating procedure protocols just so that we ensure that meetings are kind of as effective as they can be. So we do ask that you participate in this process in good faith, kind of attend all meetings. This is a place where we've asked you to work collaboratively toward solutions and be respectful of each other and kind of address your concerns with the group in our meetings. Next slide. And in our operating procedures, we ask that you provide input on the rules. And
I did not update this slide. I apologize.
That's okay, no worries. There are going to be points in the process where members are not in agreement, where there's a proposal on the table and where folks do not agree with that proposal, and that's okay. We're here to talk through those issues, but we do ask that if there is a place where you disagree with what's on the table, that you come with your alternative, right? So what would you propose instead, rather than just the, I don't agree with this. So this is going to be a lot of, you digging deep to figure out what is the alternative that you can bring to the table that meets the interests that are in the room. And also there are going to be places in the meetings where, we open up a topic, we discuss it at length, and we kind of seek to close it. So we ask that you not reopen issues that have been thoroughly discussed further down the road once they really have been resolved. That makes it really difficult to kind of make forward progress. Next slide. Okay. And maybe I'll just kind of point a little bit to bullet number 2 here in terms of media communication. So we do ask that you defer to the Department of State Lands for any media communications if the media does approach you, which is unlikely in this rulemaking. And if you do speak to the media, just make sure to note that you're representing just your perspective and not of the entire committee. Next slide. And just a bit on public meetings. These meetings are open to the public. They are recorded. Members of the public are encouraged to attend, and everything will be placed into the public record after these meetings are done. Next slide. Right, and interested parties, there's a lot of you here today and appreciate that. So again, you are here as observers to listen in, to absorb the information, and you'll be encouraged to make your comments during the interested party portion at the end of the meetings. And Danielle described too that there's public process outside of these rulemaking advisory committee meetings where you'll be able to make your comments at the public hearing and public process at the end of the rulemaking advisory committee. When we get to public comment, I'll go over a bit more about the timing for comments, but probably about 2 minutes apiece. Next slide. All right. So maybe I'll just stop there. That was a lot of information. As I'll just see, are there any questions on kind of the operating principles or how this rulemaking advisory committee kind of works together? Yeah, Jim, go ahead.
Sorry to ask, but the time constraints on the meeting, the 2-hour length meeting, are those malleable at all? Or if you feel the discussions are productive, are you allowed to extend the time of a meeting?
Oh, to go beyond the 2 hours?
Yes.
I think we really try to stay. Some of the meetings are actually 3 hours on the calendar. Is that right?
Oh, okay.
Some of them are 3 hours, and we think that the 3 hours is usually sufficient to capture everything. Then we really try to respect people's time and not go past the 3 hours. That being said, I'm not going to say that that's a rule set in stone. And if everybody is saying, yeah, I don't have anything that I have to go to after this, and we really want to continue the discussion, that's an option.
Okay, I didn't realize there were some 3-hour meetings. That's good to know. Thank you very much.
Now you take your comment back, right, Jim? Like, oh, I don't want to go more than 3 hours. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. Do the operating principles make sense? Anyone have concerns about not being able to kind of work within those agreements there? Okay, well then I will turn it over to Blake Helm to go over the background. Over to you, Blake.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. So yes, here we are. We're at the RAC, and now we're getting into the details. So let's talk a little bit about background. The proprietary program, DSL, manages roughly 5,000 authorizations across the state of Oregon. And this is the whole state, so the coast to Snake River, and then Columbia River down to Klamath Lake. It's a lot of Oregon-owned waterways, and we issue a lot of different types of authorizations on these waterways. So we issue easements, leases, licenses, access agreements, and registrations. And we handle these over 9 different divisions of administrative rules, which is a wide variety of, commercial, non-commercial activity. But today, in this RAC, in this rulemaking, is about Division 82. Next slide, please. So also overview of what staff do typically. So Justin is our staff member joining us, as well as other staff members, but he introduced himself, and typically what staff do, and this is not an exhaustive list of everything that they do, but these are some pretty major duties that they have. They process new and renewal applications, as well as applications when leases or licenses have to be assigned or transferred. We handle sublease agreements, as well as bank consent agreements when people mortgage their property and use use the leasehold as a collateral. We have to do consent agreements for those. Site visits, we have a rotating schedule of 3-year ish schedule for conducting site visits. We review certificates of insurance, or rather our staff reviews certificates of insurance for compliance with insurance requirements in our lease documents. And we handle compliance issues with those authorization holders, drafting enforcement notices when authorizations are out of compliance, either because of rent or non-rent issues that we're having. Our staff also handle inquiries from the public regarding navigable waterways and ownership questions. Where does the state own on a particular waterway, whether tidelands have been sold along a stretch of property, whether a particular waterway has been determined navigable. These are all questions that staff field. So that's a general overview of our proprietary staff's duties that they do. Next slide, please. This particular rulemaking is going to deal with 3 different types of authorizations and then 1 certification. So first off, we're going to deal with public facility license. Division 82 handles rules and requirements for all of our public facility license, and these are structures that are owned by public entities, such as boat ramps, boat launches, public marinas, fishing platforms, or other public piers or viewing structures, as well as navigation aids. For example, Coast Guard has navigation aids in federally navigable channels. And so these are, like I said, they're publicly owned, they're open to the public, and they're typically no cost to the public outside of maybe a parking fee. But to use the structures themselves, there's either no fee or very minimal fee associated with it. So next slide, please. WARF certifications, that's the certification that that I just mentioned is covered under Division 82. And these are commercial structures that are used exclusively for the loading and unloading of goods and merchandises. They're typically located in or exclusively located in city limits and port districts. And these are for facilities that, say, transfer commodities such as potash or um, other 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 commodities used in basic production of basic industry production. Fossil fuels or other commodities may be transferred at these facilities. So next slide, please. And registrations are non-commercial structures, boat docks, small boat houses, floating recreational cabins. We also authorize pilings, erosion control structures, and voluntary habitat restorations under registrations. Intent is for smaller structures to be covered under registrations. These are personal uses dedicated almost exclusively to recreation. No commercial activity allowed. And next slide, please. And leases. This is the majority of the Division 82 rules. And we'll get into the number of leases and other authorizations. And but these are leases are used for commercial uses and other structures that are larger than 2,500 square feet. So it can be there can be activity either that's water or non-water dependent. This includes commercial docks, work boats, or other vessel moorage, seawater desalinization, and fish processing plants. Those are covered under marine industrial and marine services. And, we also see restaurants and hotels and other, non-marine or residential overwater structures. Next slide. Brief overview of our authorizations. Like I said in the beginning, we have around 5,000, and that includes easements and other divisions. But within Division 82, we have the bulk of our authorizations. You'll notice 226 public facility licenses. So you will hear me in the future maybe say PFL. That's a public facility license. I can sometimes fall into acronyms, so if there's an acronym that I mention that you're maybe not familiar with, don't hesitate to ask, and I'll happily let you know what I'm talking about. But we have also 530 waterway leases, roughly 2,936 waterway registrations. So waterway registrations make up the bulk of authorizations for the department. That's out of 5,000, that's 2,900. So pretty significant load. Next slide, please. As far as revenues, I wanted to give an idea of, what the department receives under Division 82 as far as revenue and fees, and then the amount of work that staff do associated with those applications and all the other duties that rise up. So for fiscal year 2024, we had expenditures of about $1.6 million. The application fees that we received, and these are for new renewal assignments, amendments, subleases for leases, was roughly $48,000. I think it was 48,750 for all the administrative rules. So that's all 9 divisions. We took in 48,000 in application fees. 33,000 of that application fee was from Division 82 waterway leases and public facility licenses. With those fees, proprietary coordinators processed 85 applications. Like I said, those are amendments, new renewals, assignments, bank consent, and sublease consent agreements. And when we look at the fees collected from our waterway registration program, which are the 2,900 or so authorizations, we received $177,000 in fees for those 2,900 plus authorizations. Now, they're not all due, so not all 2,900 pay dues. They are renewed on a 5-year cycle. So that is not how much revenue is received for all 2,900. But for fiscal year 2024, that is what we received in fees for registrations. And that was for 515 applications. Those are new and renewal applications. And that's performed by one person at the department. Our superhero, Jen Miller. She's great worker. She does a lot of work. Next slide. I also wanted to briefly talk about the Submerged Lands Enhancement Fund. This is a section of rules in Division 82. It was created by legislative action in 2013 and is used to help cover costs associated with voluntary waterway stewardship projects in Oregon-owned waterways. So a couple things, federal and commercial entities aren't eligible to receive SLEP funds, and nor are projects for compensatory mitigation. DSL appropriates money for the SLEP on a biennial basis, and it comes from our waterway leasing revenue. In statute, it's up to 20%, I believe, of our revenue. SLEF grants are also awarded on a biennial basis, so we appropriate money and award grants on a biennial basis. The last two bienniums, we set aside around $200,000 for these projects. We receive a handful of applications on a biennial basis, and typically, are able to distribute those $200,000 to two projects. Last year or last biennium, we approved two projects, North Clackamas Watershed Council and the Human Access Project. Both had projects that we provided funds for. All right, next slide. All right, an overview of rulemaking and our need for this. So I guess Danielle, next slide, please.
Maybe this might be a good time just to pause for just a second to see if folks had any questions about things that Blake went over with revenues, expenditures, or the various types of authorizations and certifications.
That was a lot, so I appreciate
oh yeah, no problem.
the break, Sylvia. So yeah, if anybody has questions, please raise your hand. Happy to answer them. Oh, I see you, Jim. You got a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry to be the only one to ask questions, but
no, please
the
do.
revenue piece that you just mentioned,
yes, sir.
I'm a little confused. Of the 530 ML leases, how much annual revenue do you receive from those? It didn't seem like the numbers made sense to me, because our mortgage alone in 2017 had a $30,000 a year lease.
Yes.
So,
oh, I'm sorry, Jim, go ahead.
I'm just curious, for me to sort of wrap my head around the numbers here. Can you give us a number for how much you receive in lease fees?
Yeah. So what we received in lease fees, I don't have the number in front of me, but I believe it was like 2.4 million in lease fees. So what I was trying to do is highlight in these expenditures is the work that the proprietary coordinators do is largely associated with the applications that we receive.
Okay.
So when we get a new application for a waterway lease, it's a lot of work for the department. And those fees, don't, what we're trying to highlight is those fees don't really cover the work associated with that application. And so we use our lease fees to help subsidize that greatly, right? So we've got a pretty sizable gap between the fees that we take in and the work we do associated with those fees. And we're, subsidizing that cost largely with our lease fees.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know that next month there's going to be a meeting about lease fees.
Yes, sir.
So I was hoping to be able to capture as much information before that meeting about the totality of what you receive. I know I understand now what you're talking about here with respect to the staff costs and so on. But I think for me anyway, to understand the needs of the department with respect to lease fees, it would be useful to basically have that information summarized somehow. So I know we're going to be looking at the impact of any changes to the rules on your collections. But as someone who represents people who pay these fees, I'm interested in knowing more about it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And a brief overview, we've got I have data. We could probably get, data farther back than this, but I have readily available our revenue that we've received from lease fees and other compensatory payments from 2016 to, or fiscal year 2016 to fiscal year 2024. I would say for the most part, it fluctuates, because sometimes, yeah, sometimes people pay their rent and sometimes they don't. But it does fluctuate on an annual basis. So it's anywhere from 2 million to 2.7 is what we've seen in lease fees from 2016 to 2024. Let me make sure that's correct. Yeah, the high that we had in that period was 2.7 in fiscal year 2020. So with a low of 2 million, just over 2 million in 2019.
Yeah, that data would be handy as we're trying to understand the impact of any changes. So I appreciate
Excellent.
your willingness to supply that. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure, Jim. Happy to do that before our next meeting. I think that is a good thing to flag, that we can provide some sort of summary of what did our revenue look like for Waterway leases. And like I said, I can go back farther than 2016, but I can easily provide that data by next meeting. Back to 2016. So if we want to see further, I might need a little bit more time because I'll have to work with fiscal to get me those numbers. So
Thank you very much.
yeah, absolutely, Ryan. Or excuse me, Jim. I believe, yes, Dylan, you also have your hand up. Is that correct?
Yeah, thanks. Just
Works.
to put a finer point on this, I want to make sure I understand the program revenue, 1.6 million, is related to the program of application and processing, not the program of managing. Like, I'm just trying to separate it out. It sounds like because normally in a permit program, the lease revenue is part of that program operational cost. So the number you have here for program expenditures is related only to processing and applying, not managing ongoing lease revenue. I guess that goes to, Jim's point as well of, it seems like it's either just for, intake and processing of applications, or it's related to the whole program, in which case it'd be useful to see all of it together. So
Okay.
I'm just looking for clarification on that.
Yeah, the 1.6 million in expenditures, I was highlighting staff, so labor costs. I don't, unfortunately, if you give me a second, I can probably pull up the budget line.
Yeah. Well,
And
and really just when you send stuff out, like for me, I run 5 different permitting programs. And so my program expenditures are, all inclusive. And so if yours are different, it's just useful for us to know how it's connected. So what is program expenditures in relation to the overall program revenue? So that and if that's not relevant, how is it broken down to make it, digestible by us? I think is that the ask for that clarification. I don't need it now.
okay, excellent. Yeah, happy to provide that before. We'll give a better context, and apologies for not making it as clear. What I really wanted to highlight are the expenditures and then the application fees here, because like I said, a lot of the work that we do is about processing those applications that come in. And we do have, obviously costs associated with management and enforcement, and those are, not necessarily captured by the app fees as well. And that's about, management of those authorizations. So it should be covered by the revenue that we receive. But point of this slide was to kind of highlight the gap that we see in our app fees and the significant work that our coordinators do handling those applications. So thank you. Any other questions? All great. So appreciate the questions. It's very helpful. Mike, go ahead.
Let me get everything clicked on here. So I'm still a little bit confused. So, and maybe it'll help explain it. So the 1.6 million is your full burden cost for folks to manage, or just to file and administrate applications?
As I highlighted, it's to file and administer applications. I'm sorry, Mike, if I was confused or confusing in that.
Okay. Yeah, it'd definitely be nice to see a breakdown and then understand where if you're around 2.7 million, what DSL does with the other $1 to $1 million.
That's a pretty easy question that gets it covers our other programmatic costs with our other programs. Regulatory program gets subsidized by the proprietary program as well. So
okay, thank you.
Welcome. All right, we will do our best to provide the revenue, and I will go through our expenditures and try to highlight what are the expenditures related to processing the applications versus managing those authorizations. Excuse me. All right, one last time. Any other questions, and then I will move forward. Jim.
One more, I'm sorry. So next month, as I said, it'll be an important meeting, and in my reading, the department uses different mechanisms to evaluate how much a lessee pays, whether flat rate or there's other. So in your breakdown of revenue, would you be also able to break down the money received from different lessees using those different calculation tools?
Yeah,
because
I wish.
You
Oh,
wish?
I'm sorry, Jim. I'm not trying to interrupt. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's all I'm interested in, because one of the proposed rule changes is to create a single way of calculating lease amounts.
Yes,
and now you have at least three maybe ways to do that. So as you're pulling out the revenue revenue received over the last several years, it would be useful for me to see how much was produced by each of those mechanisms.
Yeah.
Would that be something you can handle as well?
I don't believe so, unfortunately, Jim. And it's not because I don't want to, but it's because the way, and this is a horrible excuse, but it's the way that our database is set up. It is not easy for me to extract that information. I have to go through each entry. So I'd have to go through 530 leases and identify which lease is, flat rate, and which lease uses riparian value, which is 3% gross. We have, yeah, yeah, I don't know if there's a real easy way to do it. We have a data set that that I was working on for this RAC to try to get that information, and I have some of it, but it was very time consuming and labor intensive. Justin, go ahead. Do you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, do you have the ability to at least tease out what portion of the leases are determined using what rent method? I mean, maybe not the amount, but how many leases are 3%ers, how many leases are riparian land value? I don't know if that's easier to get or not, or if it would be helpful.
It would be essentially the same task, because we still have to go through and identify each lease. What is that lease? Is it flat rate? Is it riparian value? And as further complications, when we have multi-use leases, we may have a lease with 3 different uses, and then each use each use's rent is calculated using a different method. So you could have one lease with 3 different methods, and that is the case for, I think we've got a handful, maybe 1 or 2 that are like that, but we have a number where you have 2 uses and each one uses a different method. So it gets a little complicated. I will do my level best to try to tease out some of that information so that we can look and see what those worlds look like. How many leases are 3%ers? How many leases are, flat rate, and how many leases are riparian?
So the study that was done 6 years ago that lady who from Portland State seemed to have that information in the appendix.
She used a sample set of our data, and
She
there's
was
about 111 records that she used when doing her report. And the reason that she wasn't able to use a complete data set is for the reasons I just mentioned, because it was going through each lease, um, you know, um, to dig through the actual lease documents and other data to figure out, which was 3%, which was riparian. And then as well, she ran into, when you have these multi-use leases, how to appropriately deal with those.
I appreciate your willingness to try. I just was wondering how ultimately we will understand the fiscal impact of any rule change if we don't know
Yeah.
how the rules will impact individual lessees. So to get that number seems like you almost have to know what we're asking for, but I'll leave it up to you to think about that, and I appreciate your willingness to try.
No, thank you, Jim, for the questions. I will say that, one thing we were able to do is I went through a handful of leases as samples and calculated their rent and compared it. What did they pay this past year, and what would they have paid if using the proposed rules? And so I have like 9-ish examples that we will go through next month that will kind of highlight, here's a typical lease for marine industrial marine service. It's this big, it's located on this river, and here's how we would calculate it with the new rules. And, here's how it was calculated previously. What would be the outcome? What are those differences that, so we hopefully be able to provide some actual examples, Jim, that would show you, what lessees should expect to change in their lease rates. So, any other questions? Nope, you could put your hand down. Great. All right, with that, let's move on. Danielle, can you take me to the need for rulemaking slide 31? There we go. Okay, so the last time that DSL changed these rules was 2013. That was 11 years ago. We we had a RAC, as we do now, that reviewed 3 different methods for for calculating rents. And their suggestion was, or rather, they couldn't come up with a consensus as which was the preferred method. So the consensus was to offer all 3 methods for applicants. After 11 years or so of implementing these rules, there's a number of issues that staff have seen with the rates. We don't, similar users are not always paying similar rates. So you could have one marine industrial marine service lease paying the minimum, yet occupying, a similar area from somebody who, pays a much higher rate. So this inequity we felt was unfair to users. So we wanted to create we're proposing a method that would provide more equitable rates across the state. In addition, we've had a kind of a number of high-profile events that have highlighted the need to amend rules, to work towards more sustainable operations when managing waterway use authorizations. A couple of events I'll point out. When I first started working here in the department, there was, an issue with one of our leaseholds along the Columbia out at Goble. A lessee had been stockpiling, barely floatable vessels, unknown quantities of, substances and 55-gallon barrels. It was a complete, mess, and it ended up costing the state upwards of $24 million, which all came out of the Common School Fund. And in it, and recently, through our, normal site visits, we've seen other areas that have similar levels of derelict structures and issues that are very concerning. So one of the things that we're trying to address in the need is to amend our rules for the general conditions for our lessees, requiring them to have maintain their leaseholds and premises free of debris, to remove unauthorized vessels. These were all conditions, and we'll go over them, that are in our lease documents that lessees sign, and in order to do business with the state. We're moving from our lease documents into our rules, so that it's stronger enforcement and allows for easier allows us for an easier path to address these troublesome issues. So we've explored a number of strategies that didn't require rulemaking to implement. So, for example, we had been using the assessed value incorrectly to calculate rents based on a misunderstanding of our rules, and we were able to address that by switching to the use of real market value, which is as we know, a lot higher, and it actually reflects the value of the adjacent land. And then I believe I mentioned, I have mentioned this before, but our 3-year schedule for lease site inspections, that was, a product of the Portland State study that Jim mentioned, and one of the things that we identified as a strategy that we could use without rulemaking. But as you know, we're here, so there were a number of things that we needed to do in rulemaking to address, recurring issues. Next slide. So what are the proposed updates, and what are we trying to accomplish? So we want to simplify our method for calculating lease rates from 3 to 1. We want to increase application fees to help track with inflation, followed by an annual increase of 5%. We added a submerged lands enhancement fund fee to help fund the submerged lands enhancement fund, or provide monies for the submerged lands enhancement fund, so that those funds don't come out of programmatic costs or other revenues that could be used to cover programmatic costs. And then add additional application fees when having to send our lease documents or other documents to Department of Justice, as well as to address when leases go into holdover. So that's when a lease expires, and we are treating it as a month-to-month lease. It's more expensive for us to administer and manage those leases when we're having to address them on a month-to-month. And so, it's in everybody's best interest to get these renewed, and so we don't like to see our leases go into holdover status. We want them renewed, and often, yeah. So next slide, sorry. So additionally, set initial term for lease to 5 years. Right now, it is up to 15. And we've noticed an industry standard that typical commercial leases are in the 7 to 8 year period. And we've seen other, leases that states offer at a shorter term. We believe this will help us to address management of waterway leases, requires us to review the file more often, requires us to visit the site more often so that we can see when things start to deteriorate and address them sooner rather than later. We'll also be adding financial assurance requirements for registration. So these are insurance requirements. Right now, registrations are not required to have or maintain insurance for the structures, which poses a liability to the state if any damage is caused by those structures. It puts the holder in a situation where they don't have the ability to easily pay for those damages. And, I'm sure people are familiar that work on a waterway can get very expensive very fast. And so without insurance, you know, um, these costs either don't get paid or get paid by the state. So we also want to finally use clear and simple language where current rule is confusing or complex. So there are a number of, phrases used that were overly complicated and unnecessarily so. So we've addressed those by trying to simplify the language and make it more readable. All right. Any questions about the overview before we move on? Jim, go ahead.
Back again, sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
In some things I've read, so one of the things I read was that recurring leases, renewing leases would be allowed an extension beyond 5 years. It's unclear
That is
whether.
correct.
And do you have any language about that beyond an extension?
Yes. So it would, it falls under certain conditions. And Jim, I appreciate the question. I don't want to get too bogged down in the details.
Sure, that's fine. We can wait.
We'll show you the rules language and you'll see. But the idea was, when leases renew, there will be certain conditions that allow for extended terms.
Okay.
Lessees in good standing. Say, for example, you are needing a loan from the bank, and the bank requires a certain length of term for the authorization for the lease in order to get that loan. That would be another example of allowing for extended terms beyond 5 years. So there will be the ability to change upon renewal. And so also, this would not affect existing leases, right? So if you have an existing lease, it's not going to go from 15 years to 5 years. You will play out your term, obviously. And since it's a renewal, you will be subject to a longer term than 5 years if you meet those conditions.
The last question is the 3-year-ish inspections you mentioned earlier. Don't they also provide you an avenue with a long lease to perhaps manage the length of that lease or cancel the lease? Why would you do inspections every 3 years anyway, if you can't use that as a way to modify an existing lease?
Well, modifications, since we were dealing with consenting parties, modifications have to happen by consent,
Okay.
right? So we can propose, hey, we would like to change this in your lease. But we can't force somebody to accept that unless it's a requirement by state law.
Okay.
Right. And so what the inspections allow us to do are to highlight deficiencies. Hey,
Okay.
the structure looks a little dilapidated. It looks like it's going to, sink. Or you have, you know, um, vegetation growing. We've seen this vegetation that grow on people's, um, you know, um, what am I trying to say? Booms that they put around, right? Sometimes people use floating logs to protect their structures, and they'll just start accumulating those, and eventually things grow. It looks, It does not look great. It does not, it's not, good for the leasehold for that to be in there. And we often will ask them to remove it, or we'll see other deficiencies, that might be concerning. And we can address them there through notices of deficiency, which can then, turn into defaults and terminations, but that's a longer process, and so we can manage those issues that way. But as far as changing the terms and conditions of the lease, the best opportunity to do that is at renewal, where we can, provide a new lease document that updates, hey, these are things that we need to address based on inspections that we've had, or based on the recommendation of DOJ, who said we need to change these terms to address other legal issues. So it gives us more flexibility to adjust and amend the terms to bring them up to the times, so to speak. We have leases from 1969 that are still valid, with some really curious, language that puts us in a bind. And so we want to kind of address those by having a shorter cycle. Does that answer your question, Jim? Excellent. Okay, so next slide, unless there's no other questions, I'm sorry. All right, seeing no hands. Next slide, what we heard. So we've had some early conversations with some of y'all. Thank you very much for making yourself available, those who were able to do that. And we've heard it from a number of you. Helping people enjoy the outdoors is a pretty common motivation. So we want people to use the great things of Oregon, the waterways, and our other natural resources safely. And so that's a common motivation for all of us. Environmental responsibility and stewardship of our waterways is also a core value. And so this is another reason why y'all good folks are here, is because we all see the need for responsible stewardship in our waterways. We also heard that people want to understand how the proposed changes are going to affect their day-to-day operations and budgets, which I, completely sympathize with. And I know that a lot of y'all are lease payers. And you pay rents every year, and so you're very much interested in how this is going to affect your bottom line. So I appreciate that. Oregon waters are a public asset. So one question that has come up is, how do authorized uses negatively or positively impact our lands and waters, and how can there be more accountability? So hopefully those are questions that we can address in our rulemaking here, and hopefully by meeting 6 we'll have a good answer to those questions, and we will get more into that in our later meetings. So incentivizing waterway leaseholder participation in the Clean Marina program could benefit everyone. If for those of you who are not familiar, the Clean Marina program is a program that is run and operated by the Oregon State Marine Board. It is for marinas that meet a certain standard of operation. And how do these rules contribute to addressing abandoned and derelict boats? Another question that I know everybody is eagerly interested in, and I suppose I can address it here. Long story short, these rules will not address ADVs, because these rules are only related to leases, license, registrations, and wharf certifications. So we are dealing with uses within a authorized area or premises, and ADVs are typically vessels outside of these. So insofar as an ADV is located within a premises, these rules will apply, but there will not be a specific section that addresses in the rules ADVs. So next slide, please. Oh, Dylan, go for it.
Yeah, with respect to ADVs, you just said that they don't apply unless they're within the premises. So I would say oftentimes if there's a rope connecting the boat to the structure, or the permit or the leased facility, right? Then it would apply. And I think that there's a lot to be said about that. And I would hope that we would, address that because we've bought a lot of boats this year. Because there were slight errors, and that's not healthy for anyone. And my guess is that there are quite a few boats without trailers in parking lots at boat ramps, which are leased facilities. But whether or not that property is connected or in the premises because it's at the parking lot leading to it, if you're still involved with that process, perhaps the language might say something like within the leased premises or the premises or adjacent and relate directly attributable to such licensed uses, right? So I would hope that we could kind of look at anything that is directly attributable to that lease or within the premises might be included, because we get so much confusion. There's so many jurisdictions that it would be useful to talk about that if possible. So thanks. Just a comment.
Yeah, absolutely, Dylan. We'll bring that up. I believe February we have marked for to talk about ADVs, but it's a part of all of those things, so it will likely not be. I wasn't intended to be a larger conversation than as far as like addressing rules. But if there are things that we can incorporate, like you were mentioning, it's connected facilities. Putting my lawyer hat on, I don't know if our jurisdiction as, or authority rather as property owner would extend to the upland. We can definitely tell people what they should and should not be doing, on the waterway, because those are the public owns those submerged and submersible lands. We manage them, and so our authority is pretty clear. But when it comes to, this connected facilities, I think it gets a little grayer. We may have to show some sort of nexus, that we have a vested interest in this, and that 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 use or that activity negatively impacts state-owned land. So, but happy to have that conversation. I think will be very helpful for us to work through that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so my work here is done for a minute, and I will pass it on over to, I believe, Danielle. Nope, Sylvia, excuse me, my apologies.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Blake. And maybe I'll just check in one more time to see if RAC members have any other questions on that background information. Yeah, Jim.
Not a question, just a comment. If you look at the Appendix E on the report from Portland State, I think that lady captured all of the leases that we were talking about. I could count it at going on 500, so I'm guessing they're all there. And I'm guessing that's an Excel spreadsheet export. So I don't know if you can use it, but it's at least a point in time in 2018. So that's all.
I greatly appreciate that, Jim. We don't have the Excel spreadsheet for that. It is in PDF only format, and it is very difficult for me to turn that into a spreadsheet. I tried my darndest to do that.
Oh, well.
But it was a bunch of gobbledygook when I did that. And I don't know why we don't have that in the Excel spreadsheet format. So
maybe the author still has it. So that might be an option.
We can definitely reach out. We know where Andrea works. I believe she's still with the city of Portland, but I'm not sure.
Okay, that's all my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks. Sounds like some effort to try to track down information. And I heard earlier too that DSL will try to put some more information together on the revenues and expenditures for future meetings. Any other questions, comments? All right. And again, RAC members will have plenty of time at future meetings to kind of really delve into the details on all of this and explore the proposed rules and have conversation. Okay, well, now we are ready to move into our interested party comments section. So we normally dedicate about 10 minutes to this. We do have a lot of folks on the line. So I'll ask anyone who's an interested party, if you want to make a comment now, just go ahead and raise your hand in the platform. And again, if you find the react button at the bottom, there's a raise hand option within that submenu, or maybe you just have raise hand at the bottom of your screen. And I'll see how many people are interested in making comment. You can raise your hand now while I go over these just protocols here. We would ask folks to keep your comment to about 2, maybe 3 minutes if we don't have too many. And I'll just call on you and say your name, your representation. If you represent an organization or any group, it's always helpful to know that. And we just ask you to keep your comments kind of based on or related to what you heard today and respectful of everyone in the room. All right, I don't see any hands up. I thought we would see more since there are so many folks on the line here. But maybe if anyone's having trouble raising your hand, just go ahead and get off mute and let me know. Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining and listening in. Appreciate you all being here. I think we can, with that, we can move into next steps. And here I'll turn it back over to Danielle.
Hello, thank you, Sylvia. So following this meeting, meaning sometime in the next couple of days, by the end of the week, draft rule language, proposed compensation rates, and application fees will be sent out to the RAC members. Those will also be posted on our website. Everything that goes out to RAC members is posted publicly by the department for interested parties or basically members of the public to have access to, because it's all public record, and we just want to make sure we're being as transparent as possible with the rulemaking process with the public. And in the next week, a meeting summary will be sent to the RAC members, and today's meeting recording will be posted. So RAC members, you'll be getting separate emails from Sylvia, one this week regarding the proposed rule language and compensation rates and fees. And then next week with the meeting summary and link to the meeting recording. And then prior to each meeting, like this meeting, a meeting agenda will be sent, and anything else that we feel like you might need for the next meeting. So maybe some data will be sent out a week before. So we try to do that so that you have enough time to digest everything. And again, all meeting materials will be posted to DSL's rulemaking website, which that's the link in the chat. And if you're interested in other rulemaking projects we have going on, they're all listed there. Any questions about what's next and coming up immediately with the RAC?
And I'll also add 2 things to this. I sent out an email to Rulemaking Advisory Committee members with a request to sign up for a one-on-one meeting. This is just kind of a short 25 minutes so that we can get to know each other a little bit better, and so that I can get your initial thoughts on the rules. So you'll be getting the proposed rule changes this week, and having conversations with you all early in the process will just help frame our agendas going forward, help me understand which topics are most important, help DSL know what questions to be ready to answer at future meetings, or what information to provide in advance. So those will be really critical and helpful conversations. Some of you have already signed up. If you haven't, please do. And I'll resend that link later this week as well. I know with the holidays coming up, it can be hard to schedule these things, but I'm hoping to be able to chat to everyone. And also in a follow-up email, I'll relist the dates for our future meetings. And if any of those don't work for you, just check your calendar for the future, let us know, and we can seek to reschedule if we need to make sure we have participation from all RAC members. And now we'll see if you, any questions, folks? Okay, well, I think that's probably it for today's meeting. Blake or Danielle, anything to close us out with here?
No, I think I've covered everything I need to cover.
Yeah, just a big thank you to everybody who is participating and helping us go through this rulemaking. We're not going to be able to be successful without y'all and without your participation. So just huge thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.